Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Please turn your microphones off. Welcome to the third lecture of the IIER Distinguished Virtual Lecture Series that is organized by the Research Program on the Theory and Practice of International Relations in the Institute of International Economic Relations in Athens. In today's, excuse me, just to make sure that, okay, that it's recording. Okay, great. I apologize for that. In today's web event, the topic is 100 Years of International Relations Feminism. We are extremely honored and excited to host a trailblazer in the field of IR, Judith Ann Tickner, Professor Emerita in the School of International Relations at the University of Southern California and Distinguished Professor in Residence at the School of International Service in the American University in Washington, D.C. Professor Tickner, as a distinguished scholar in IR, needs no introduction. She holds honorary degrees from Uppsala University in Sweden and Monash University in Australia. Her principal areas of research include international theory, peace and security, and feminist approaches to international relations. Her publications include, among others, the books Gender in World Politics, Issues and Approaches in the Post-Cold War World, published in 2001, and A Feminist Voyage Through International Relations, published in 2014. She is a past president of the International Studies Association. We all know the J. Ann Tickner Award by ISA that was established in 2011 to recognize Professor Tickner for her path-breaking role within the International Studies Association and in the discipline of international relations more generally. She was also named as one of the 50 key thinkers in Martin Griffiths' 50 Key Thinkers in International Relations. So before I give the floor to Professor Tickner, I would like to thank, as always, Professor Haralambos Tsardanidis, who unfortunately is not here with us today because he's traveling for business in Chicago, Mr. Dimitris Polalis and Ms. Stella Migliotti, who are instrumental in the organization of those web events. Please turn your microphone off. After Professor Tickner's lecture, there's going to be a Q&A session if you would like to ask her questions and engage with her or comment. You will turn on your raise your hand, please turn on your microphone, introduce yourself, and you will be able to discuss with Professor Tickner. Professor Tickner, thank you so much. It's such a great honor to host you. We are all very excited and we're looking forward to your lecture and insights. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that very generous introduction, Avi. And I'm so excited and thrilled to be able to do this. My title of my talk is 100 Years of IR Feminism. And this is actually based on a paper that Jackie True, who's a professor at Monash University in Australia, and I authored. It was in the International Studies Quarterly in 2018, and that goes into obviously much more detail than I can talk about here. But I came to write this paper because we was all celebrating the end of World War I, and I was very curious because there was a whole lot of books in IR came out on the retrospective of World War I, and not a single one of them was written by women, and there was no mention of women in any of the books. So I went back and tried to find out what women were doing, because I figured they must have been doing a lot too, but they're never noticed. And so that's really what I'm going to be talking. That's the origin of how I came to write this paper. So 100 Years of IR Feminism. International relations disciplinary history traces its origins to the early 20th century, but feminist IR did not officially enter the discipline until around 1989. Since its beginnings, IR has been a male-dominated field. Very few women were admitted to the canon, And when I was teaching, it was hard to find books written by women to assign to my students. I mean, there weren't any feminist books, but there really weren't any books written by women either. But this doesn't mean that women were not writing and speaking about international affairs, only that their voices were silenced, trivialized, or ignored. So I decided to go back to the early 20th century when the discipline got started to try to find out what kind of knowledge women were creating. Admittedly, and I apologize for this, that's all I could do at that particular time, my research was limited to Europe and US women at the time of World War I. Most of these women would see themselves as activists rather than scholars. Yet the knowledge they produce has strong resonance with both the theories and practice of contemporary IR feminism. To illustrate this, I'm going to focus on the Congress of Women held in The Hague, Netherlands in 1915 during World War I. The purpose of the Congress was to draw up a series of principles that would ensure a just peace after the war ended. After discussing these principles, I will focus on the writings of an American, Jane Addams, because she was president of that Congress. Addams was both an activist and one of the founders of the philosophical school of pragmatism. Early pragmatism is surprisingly similar to certain forms of feminist knowledge today. In 1915, around 1,500 women from countries on both sides of World War I traveled to The Hague to attend a congress, the aim of which was to devise principles for a just peace settlement. At the time, the women were condemned for being idealistic, impractical, and even dangerous. Yet many points in the Congress resolutions were remarkably forward-looking, anticipating many of the principles and institutions the international community has adopted since. They also resonate with feminist research and practice today. Among the principles was the claim that civilians could not be protected in wartime, noting that in all wars, women are especially vulnerable to violence. Caregiving to children, the sick, and the elderly, generally the task of women, must be sacrificed in times of conflict. Likewise, feminists today focus on the vulnerability of civilians and the special burdens that women face in wartime, burdens that are often ignored by the international community. The resolutions urge states to begin immediate negotiations for just peace. Negotiations that should include arbitration, the implication being that no nation should be required to surrender unconditionally, which of course is exactly what happened to Germany. To this end, they recommended that a conference of neutral nations a Congress of Neutral Nations be convened to offer continuous mediation, and that foreign policies of states be subject to democratic control, including equal political rights and participation of women, which was rather radical at that time. It was before the women even had the vote. They proposed the establishment of a permanent international court of justice. The Hague women emphasized that representatives of the people, both men and women, should be involved in peace negotiations, noting that it was unacceptable that only the men who made war were permitted to seats at the peace table. After the Congress, the women visited the capitals of Europe to disseminate their resolutions to foreign policy leaders, but they were not taken seriously. However, in hindsight, these principles seem sensible and practical. Given the rise of fascism in Germany in the 1930s and its role in contributing to World War II, the warning about unconditional surrender is remarkably forward-looking. And Jane Addams and Emily Balch, two members of the American delegation, had an audience with U.S. President Woodrow Wilson. Wilson's 14 points, his plan for a just post-war order, bore a striking resemblance to the Hague principles, but he never cited the women. And the principles were also enshrined in the Covenant of the League of Nations, although, again, no credit was given to the Hague women. Jane Addams was appointed president of the Congress, partly because the U.S. was still neutral at the time of the Congress. If Addams is still remembered today, it is generally for her social work amongst the poor in Chicago and her work at Hull House, a home for immigrant women, rather than for her important role at the Peace Congress or her many writings on peace. But what has been completely erased from history is that she was also one of the founders of the American Pragmatist School of Philosophy, an approach that resonates with feminist theory today. I've looked through many philosophy textbooks and I've never found her name mentioned once, which is interesting. American pragmatists believe that people need to question what they think with the goal of getting beyond abstract thinking and creating practical knowledge that is useful for solving everyday problems. John Dewey, who was the chair of the philosophy department at the University of Chicago in 1894, was one of the most noted pragmatists of the period. He was also a collaborator with Addams, for whom he had great respect, citing her influence on his own work and calling her book, Democracy and Social Ethics, quote, one of the great books of our times. Indeed, Addams made equal contributions to the early formulation of pragmatism, yet her work was never credited or cited by later philosophers. Even Dewey himself was reluctant to cite his female collaborators. Pragmatist philosophy, being contextual and grounded in individuals' own life experiences, was especially appealing to Dewey's women students at the University of Chicago. It allowed them to trust their own lived experiences as women, even when they might run counter to accepted norms that throughout history have generally been based on elite men's lives. Many of these women pragmatists took pragmatism one step further by claiming that scholars should become members of the communities plagued by the sort of problems that their theories were supposed to solve. But since women were largely excluded from positions in U.S. philosophy departments in the early 20th century, their ideas were not carried forward. Those who followed the pragmatist tradition worked mainly outside of academia. While Dewey was developing his ideas as chair of Chicago's philosophy department, Adams was articulating hers through her work at Hull House, where Dewey was a frequent visitor. Whereas we remember John Dewey as a great philosopher, those of us who still remember Adams usually think of her as a social worker rather than a philosopher and author of books and those articles on sociology, peace, and philosophy, writings that have all been largely forgotten. Pragmatism provided the theoretical foundation upon which the Hague women built their ideas about peace. Adams had come to her thinking through her experiences at Hull House, working amongst multinational immigrant communities. Consistent with pragmatist philosophy, Adams described the settlement founders as, quote, experimenters, learning from experience, and always willing to change their methods as the environment demanded. She had come to realize that truth was contingent, not absolute, and must be discovered through experience, which is rather similar to a lot of feminist theory today. She viewed democracy, social justice, and international peace as mutually defining concepts that must be achieved through nonviolent means. I have suggested that the women at Hull House and at The Hague were engaging in international politics and diplomacy. They were coming up with ideas for a just settlement after World War I, which, had they been implemented, might have prevented the rise of Nazism and the Second World War. They were also creating the pragmatist knowledge upon which these ideas were based. Yet their history has completely forgotten by international relations, a discipline that has been based on knowledge about elite men's lives. I think obviously it's changing now. I'm talking about earlier. In that time, the Hague Women's proposals for just peace were either ignored or not attributed to them. Often they were derided as silly and impractical. Yet if we fast forward a century, we find many of their proposals reflecting the international community's efforts to act on these very same principles today. In the year 2000, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 1325, the first time the Security Council has addressed women's security needs. Like the Hague Principles, 1325 provides an international framework for applying a gender perspective to international security. Acknowledging that women and men have different needs and experiences of conflict, the resolution stressed women's rights to equal participation in peace negotiations, conflict resolution, and prevention. The resolutions were the result of women's long, hard work, usually behind the scenes, get the male-dominated Security Council to take women's security needs seriously. And I looked at some of the background for the conference. They did use a lot of feminist scholarship too, the women who provided the background for the resolution. 1325 echoes the 1915 principle and their call to attend to the impact of war on civilians. Like the Hague Principles, it calls for democratic control of security and foreign policy, including the political participation of women in peace negotiations and security provisions. That hasn't gone very far yet, but there's been a lot of interesting research suggesting that when more women participate in peace negotiations, that the negotiations actually have a longer life. There's been quite a bit of research on that. Over the 22 years since, there have been 7 subsequent Security Council resolutions constituting what's called the United Nations Women, Peace and Security Agenda. These resolutions have called for state action and accountability to protect all civilians, including women and children, during and after conflict, to end the widespread use of gender-based violence as instruments of conflict, and for increased women's participation in post-conflict processes. Although implementation is far from being realized, this agenda represents a significant step towards the practical realization of the principles put forward by the Hague women 100 years ago. I was really struck when I did this research by how similar they are and how long it's taken for them to be taken seriously. And that doesn't mean to say that they're being implemented, but at least they're part of the international community's discourse now. In going back and asking what European and US women were doing in the early 20th century, when the IIER discipline was founded, I discovered not only these striking parallels with the UN Women, Peace and Security Agenda, but also with Adams' pragmatist philosophy and the knowledge that feminists are building today. Feminists build knowledge that starts from the experience of real people's lives. In other words, knowledge that emerges from practice. And when writing about international politics, feminists generally define peace in the expansive way that Adams did, a positive peace that means much more than just the absence of war. I also found out that positive peace became a very popular concept in the 1960s. I remember when Johann Galtung first introduced this term into peace studies. But again, the work that women had done earlier on peace studies was never mentioned by the early peace studies approach. Feminists are skeptical about historical knowledge that claims to be universal and objective, but is usually knowledge based only on men's lives. When we construct history only from men's lives, and that's usually elite men, we deny ourselves a complete picture of reality. In international relations, with its emphasis on war and security, it is particularly true that subject matter has, for the most part, been written by, for, and about men. This was certainly true in the early days of the discipline, the time when Adams and other feminist pragmatists were writing, and when women were organizing for peace and building their own vision of international relations. But as I have suggested, women's stories have consistently been erased from history. Happily, today things are changing. A vibrant feminist scholarship is more inclusive, not only of women's voices, but of voices of other marginalized groups. There is more attention being paid to voices from the global South, and the scholarship of early 20th century African-American writers who had very important things to say about race and imperialism are now being heard too. There have also been some dramatic changes in the policy world. In 2014, Margot Wallström, the then Swedish foreign minister, announced that Sweden would pursue a feminist foreign policy. Sadly, in 2022, a new right-wing government abandoned this policy. Nevertheless, there are now 11 countries that have declared their intent to do likewise. Among them, Canada, France, Mexico, the Netherlands, Colombia, and Chile. A feminist foreign policy is based on human rights, including the rights of women and girls, representation of women in security provision and diplomacy, climate justice, and gender-sensitive international assistance. Obviously, these goals are far from being realized, even by the countries who have declared such a policy, but that they are even being considered by certain countries, I consider a huge step forward. Let me conclude by saying that my rediscovery of these hidden voices suggests that feminism did not come late to international relations, but that international relations came late to feminism. Women were writing about international relations well before the discipline was officially founded. But knowledge is power, and whose knowledge is recorded and remembered is a matter of power politics. It is the winners who get to write history. But were the discipline to listen to these hidden voices, we might get some new insights as to how to build a more just and peaceful world. We must hope that today's opening to new voices and new avenues for a more inclusive international politics is not forgotten, just as the women of The Hague were forgotten. As the Black feminist activist Audre Lorde wrote, and I quote, "By ignoring the past, we are encouraged to repeat its mistakes." Thank you.
Professor Tickner, thank you so much. After this important lecture, I'm sure that all of us can indulge more into the feminist research program and Professor Tickner's scholarship and the feminist research in IIER theory, which emphasizes the need to incorporate feminist insights into mainstream IIER theory. And gathering from Professor Tickner's insights, her main thesis revolves around the concept of gender difference as a foundational category of analysis in understanding international relations. Therefore, she argues that traditional IIER theories fail to account for the diverse perspectives and experiences of women and men, and that by integrating gender analysis, we can develop more comprehensive and inclusive theories of global politics, especially with her reference to the philosophical paradigm of pragmatism and how it relates to feminism and also to the feminist foreign policy. We see that many countries now are adopting it, like Canada, Sweden, Norway, and other countries. Before I turn it to the audience, if there are any comments or if somebody would like to ask something, Professor Tickner, I would like to remind everybody, because I'm sure that we have people in the audience who are not very, have not indulged into the feminist research in international relations. She began her lecture by mentioning a very famous article, her 1997 article, "You Just Don't Understand Troubled Engagements Between Feminist and IIER Theorists," drawing upon Deborah Stannard's 1990 book, in which she reconstructs some conversational encounters between feminists and IIER theorists and offers some hypotheses as to why misunderstandings so frequently result from these encounters. So with her primary thesis of her work being that contemporary feminist perspectives on international relations are based on ontologies and epistemologies that are quite different from those that inform the conventional discipline. And we hope that this is something that we're going to explore here today. I want also to make reference to her infamous, in quotes, for theorists of realist orientation, 1988 book chapter, A Critique of Morgenthau's Principles of Political Realism, in which she presents an alternative feminist epistemology based on critical theory and post-positivism that challenges the 6 tenets of political realism and of the rationalism tradition in IIER as they were proposed by Hans Morgenthau. And of course, in her lecture, she made extensive reference to the need to include feminist approaches to the study of international security, peace, and war. Her contribution to feminist security studies are well known, and her relevant 1993 book, Gender in the International Relations, Feminist Perspectives in Achieving Global Security, and many relevant articles, becoming a pioneer in advocating for an interpretivist and post-positivist epistemology in the study of peace and war in order to foster inclusivity, as she mentioned in her lecture, and fully explore the relationship between abstractions and differences, especially around the concept of power and social hierarchies. So these are my comments. I would like to turn it to the audience to see if there are any comments or questions. If I see that we have many scholars in the audience who are actually experts in feminism, they would be very welcome if they would like to engage with Professor Tickner. Okay. Since there are yet no questions, if you permit me, Professor Tickner, I have a question that it mainly draws upon your critique on Morgenthau's principles, if this is something that would interest you to discuss. It's from your chapter in the edited volume by Rebecca Grant and Kathleen Newland, Gender and International Relations. And in your article, you caution us through Evelyn Fox Keller's study on McClintock's science against the construction of a feminist science which could perpetuate similar exclusionary attitudes, making also the parallelism with Harding's African worldview, you mentioned in your lecture as well, and Merchant's ecological thinking, so as to create a feminist or not epistemologies in IIER that value ambiguity and difference. Critics argue that feminist epistemology sometimes relies on essentialist assumptions about gender, portraying women as inherently peaceful or nurturing and men as inherently aggressive or dominant. And this oversimplified view can reinforce gender stereotypes that overlooks the diversity and complexity of gender identities and experiences. So do you think that the scientific woman, in quotes, of the 21st century can overcome the essentialism criticism that feminist IIER scholars are subjected to? And how does she acknowledges intersectionality, meaning the interconnectedness of multiple axes of identity and power as the fabric of social construction? Also, this draws upon a question that Professor Knud Erik Jorgensen brought to my attention and would like to ask you, like, how do you feel this debate is grounded today if we made a trope from the famous 1948 book by Hans Morgenthau, Scientific Man versus Power Politics, Scientific Woman versus Power Politics? Thank you very much.
Well, that's a question that I have thought quite a lot about, because I wrote that piece in 1988, which seems like a very long time ago. And at that time, I think that, funnily enough, although I have a lot of problems with it now, some of which you've just mentioned, it is the thing that gets most reproduced in IR textbooks, and I mean kind of mainstream IR textbooks. At least I think we should be thankful that they're, gone on to something. But when I wrote that article in 1988, there was no feminist literature in IR, none, really none at all. Cynthia Enlow was writing about military issues, and so was Judith Seam, another American scholar, but there really was nothing. And so I purposely, well, to start with, I didn't have any IR feminist theoretical literature to even draw upon. And what I did to write that article was I read a woman called Evelyn Fox Keller, an American woman, American physicist, who wrote about how the natural sciences were really a gendered field. And I was absolutely amazed. Apparently, she was absolutely ridiculed by scientists for suggesting such thing. But many of the ideas that she had, I thought would apply to international relations. And I remember no feminist literature. I really wrote that piece for the discipline. I did not write it. Well, there weren't very many feminist theorists at that point, but I really wrote it for the IR discipline. And although now it looks very primitive for all of the reasons that you just suggested, not talking about intersectionality, being very kind of Western centered, it served an important purpose, I think. And I must say that all my academic career has really been in international relations departments. I've never been in a women's studies department because they don't need me. I mean, but IR, particularly in the early days, did need people like us. And I mean, even bringing that up now with mainstream IR scholars, it still seems, a little of a stretch for them, which I find absolutely extraordinary, because it is primitive, and not many of the things you said about it are absolutely true. I was very white Western, not talking about intersectionality. There was not very much work at the beginning about minorities and so forth, but I accept your criticism, but I think it really served a purpose, and it still seems to be doing that today, which absolutely kind of horrifies me that I still see mainstream IR scholars will come up to me and say, "Oh, I read, I remember that article you wrote." And then remember that Hans Moltke was also a man of his time. He was a refugee from Nazi Germany, and when I taught, I always contextualize the authors we taught, and he had reasons for writing the way he did too. I think from power politics, rationality, all coming out of a kind of Nazi experience. And also you did mention some, I guess I should keep talking, but I did spend about 10, 20 years after that trying to talk more in a more sophisticated fashion about, what was wrong with the discipline. Universe mind, you just don't understand. I spent about 10 years writing those kind of articles. The last one I wrote was in 2015, I think. Oh no, it was 2010. You'll Never Understand, which I actually published in an Australian journal, which I thought was a little bit safer. But since then, I've really given up that engagement with IR theory, and I started to do other things like look at indigenous knowledge, all kinds of different things. You know, doing a lot of this historical research just because I think I've said what I need to say about IR theory. And I'm also found that it isn't that mainstream theorists don't, they are interested in the subject matter of the things that we do, but the incompatibility between the theoretical approaches is just so strong. And in the US, that's a particular problem because there's so much commitment to rational choice theory that constructivist thought and the sort of thought that feminists generally engage with just does not fit at all. And that, I think, it's always in the methodological incompatibilities that cause the difficulties. Too long.
Thank you, Professor Tickner. Before I turn it to Ms. Zigakis, I think Professor Reichwein had a question. Do you still?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sure.
Yes. Yeah. Professor Tickner, thank you very much for giving this lecture. Before I pose a question and I do a critique, I will let you know when I was studying political science in Germany, Frankfurt at Goethe University, end of the 1990s. The first article about realism I read was your critique of Hans Morgenthau. And this brings me to my, and then later I became a realist and I did a lot of stuff on realism and Morgenthau, also critical perspectives on this. Saying this brings me to my first of 2 points. You spoke about the Hague women and the history of the movement of women becoming more and more influential, important. So this is what we can do with every theory in IR. You can elaborate, work out the origins of something. May it be feminism, may it be liberalism, may it be realism, and all these isms. And this is what we do. We means some colleagues of mine in the IR circus call it mainstream IR or whatever. So we do work on the origins in order to reconstruct the theoretical foundations of something. And this is what you do and what you did in the last couple of years to research on feminism, on whatever you may call it, on the origins, on the history, on the roots. And when I do this, or when we do this, there is always the same question in the room. Why are you doing this? What is the added value? What is the benefit? What can we explain? What can we measure? And all this mainstream IR stuff. And so you ended today in your lecture with this 2000 United Nations Security Council debate on women's security. So this is one point in case. And I think what makes feminism or each other theory so important in political science and IR is that we first of all know the history, the origins, the roots, that we second know the development, may it be political historical context, may it be persons, figures in IR, developing an ism, and then, and this brings me to my last point, third of all, what we need is to make clear the added value of, in our case today, feminism to deal with contemporary questions, challenges in international politics. So my question to you is, the women's security, which is another point than human security, or all these security debates, is one point in case, absolutely. Do you have one or two or three other cases by which you can make the argument that it is so important to bring feminist perspectives, plural in IR, back in to explain, for example, the Russian war in the Ukraine, populism popping up in nearly all democratic societies, not only here in Germany, and so on and so forth. Because then I think you have the attendance and the voices on your side. This is a kind of eye catcher or of a voice catcher, so to say, when you can make arguments why we need this feminist perspectives. You can also change it with liberal, realist, constructivist, institutionalist, whatever perspectives to deal with contemporary problems and challenges in international politics. For example, the Israeli-Gaza war now. Thank you, and sorry for being that kind of.
No, thank you. Thank you. Very interesting comments. I fear that some of the populism, and certainly we've seen a lot in the US, including people who are trying to shut down particularly women's studies programs in this country. I see a huge backlash against some of these new ideas, which I find very disturbing. We're really suffering from that in the US with all this banning books. They're mostly books either about women or non-sex conforming people. Those are the kinds of issues that we're trying to close down. And I think that feminism and all the flowering of many other kind of ways of thinking about the world is just profoundly frighten people. But I think people are very used to just thinking kind of in one way, and they have a hard time with all these differences. When you talked about the different isms, I think, yes, that's too bad, and I think it's true. But I do also want to stress this methodological incompatibility, which I see between most of critical theories and mainstream theories. And I just don't know how you overcome that. I've been sort of working on that for years and years, and it never seemed to get across. And I've kind of given up that now. I'm also interested in, it isn't, I mean, feminist theory is very broad and all the others, but there are so many other aspects of knowledge production that we could engage with. I've become fascinated by indigenous knowledge, which I think is the best way that we're going to solve the climate crisis, by listening to indigenous people who are even way more marginalized than women. And there are just a lot of different things that we can learn. There was something else I was going to have forgotten now about what you said. But would you like to respond to that, or I see somebody else has a hand up? I can only see people on the Zoom.
So I wait until other colleagues can post some
questions. That's a very good answer, but it's I don't know. Well, and as far as the wars and things that are going on, I mean, we've got a long way to go. We're not, because feminist foreign policy is very much stressing peace and security, and we're just not going in that direction at all. In fact, we're going in totally the other direction. One interesting book that I have just come across, which I think is very bold, because I don't know whether you can see it. It's by Christine Lund. She's a German, and she's written "The Future of Foreign Policy is Feminist." And I think that's a very brave title. But I also become very intrigued about the idea of just changing the discourse. I just read a manuscript, which isn't yet published, by somebody who's talking about just changing paradigm of IR, just telling a different story. That, you know, we have the story that we tell, and we go from one war to the next, and peace treaties and wars and so forth. Supposing we told a totally different story about the history of IR. I think that makes a difference. It's something that intrigues me more and more, that discourse itself is so tied up to reality and what really happens in the real world. If we just had a different discourse. I had a colleague once who wrote a book about all the conflicts that were settled short of war. And it was amazing. I mean, there were about 6 times as many as there are ones where we went to war, but we never hear about them. And I think it would make a difference if we heard more about just changing the stories we tell.
If I may add to that, I'm not sure if she still is, but I know for sure that she was, Christina Lanz, she was the director of the Foreign Policy East Foundation. And one of her most famous quotes about feminist foreign policy was not adding women to the table, not to add women to the table, but smash the whole table and build a new one where everyone can participate, regardless gender, race, class, the intersectionalities we were discussing before. So it was very interesting because I had noted this quote by Christina Lanz, and it was very interesting that you brought her book up and her name. Thank you, Professor Tickner and Professor Akvine. Ms. Zigakis?
Just one quick.
Yes, of course.
I have been Googling some of the feminist foreign policy of Canada and looked at Mexico, and at least they've changed the discourse to talk about it. I mean, obviously they're not implementing it all. In fact, somebody from when Trudeau first came in, somebody from the Canadian Foreign Office called me and asked me for some advice on this, and it's really quite amazing, actually, that people are even thinking about this, even if they're not implementing it very well.
Actually, Sweden has made it, is implementing it, and it's and now it's in Sweden.
It's gone.
No, it's gone. No, it's not anymore, because I think they were basing their foreign policy on the 4 R's, rights. I had noted somewhere. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but in 2022, they got a new right-wing government that declared that they were no longer.
And they changed it, yeah, because they had the 4 R's, which are actually the basics for the feminist foreign policy, and they were dictating Swedish foreign policy. I'm sorry to hear that. I was under the impression that this wouldn't change. Okay, Ms. Zikakis, yes.
Thank you very much. That was a great lecture, Dr. Tickner. So my question is, what advice do you have for female IR scholars who want to work in the academia? For example, making our ideas heard among colleagues, because I see that even now our generation struggles to implement this equality in the field.
Well, maybe it depends which country you're in. I always had the feeling that Europe was slightly better than the US in terms of the discipline. I don't mean in terms of just general attitude towards women, but I'm not. I wouldn't
say that.
No, you're in Greece, right? I mean, I spent quite a bit of time in Australia, and things were much better there as far as in the university that I was in. But so are you asking about how you can speak up as a woman, or how you can introduce feminist theory into IR?
No, sometimes I have the feeling that my male colleagues don't take me seriously because I'm a female, and I have been actually, not only me, but I have a few. I have a few female colleagues as well who have been actually harassed on ideas that we have, or on a viewpoint that we have raised in class or in a conference. So yes, what I mean, in my view, in the early 21st century, these things shouldn't be happening anymore. But obviously, they keep happening.
Yeah.
So what's your advice on
I just don't know what to say. It's such a struggle. You just have to, because women are penalized both ways. You're either too pushy and outspoken, or else you're too quiet and timid. And I don't think you can win either way. I mean, it's interesting that all the attributes that we associate with speaking out, being strong and so forth, they all work for men, but they don't work well for women. So I just know you just have to kind of keep at it, I think. It's just very hard to say. I had a friend who was in the US military, and she was fairly high up, and she said if she wanted to put forward an idea at a meeting, she asked the man next to her to put it forward. Which is a terrible solution as far as I'm concerned, but she said because then it will be taken seriously. But I don't know. We just have to keep at it, I think. Good luck. I'm sorry for you. And it's also a big problem when you're trying to introduce feminist perspectives into international relations courses. Yeah, I think it's often even more difficult. You know, and if students write, I mean, write a paper about feminism, it's sort of discounted, or else, and often the professor will put it as the last section of the syllabus at the end when everybody's rather tired. And I even heard once that one professor said, well, he assigned my book and he said, well, I can't really understand this, but why don't you go ahead and read it by yourselves? That's what he said to the students. And my work is not hard to understand. It's just, there's a real block, and I just hope that we're overcoming it. But I don't teach anymore, so I don't know how it's going, but I'm sorry to hear you still have those problems.
It's just sad that women are the most affected individuals by the major issues that international relations theory tries to explain.
Yeah.
And we are still questioned what we are doing here, and why we speak about feminism and feminist international relations theories. I just don't get it. And then the same people speak about rape and about famine and about climate change and how it affects women, but on the other side, they won't accept women on the table.
I know. I think you have to kind of just keep at it and be strong. I do strongly believe in being able to change discourse if you do it for long enough. I mean, this book that I just mentioned by Christina Lantz, I like the title of her book, The Future of Foreign Policy is Feminist. I thought that was very brave to give such
Indeed.
a book, you know. And so I think
Indeed.
really forthright and just say things the way you see them. But it's hard, I know, and I sympathize.
Thank you. Thank you for your input.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Professor Tickner, I have a question. Since we mentioned realism, do you feel that there are today, with everything that's going on in the world, any promising areas for dialogue and collaboration between feminist and realist scholars in international relations? Or you think that the gap is so big that there is no way that they can find the middle ground and engage with each other. Because we see the rise of neoclassical realism, for example, that is trying to address what is happening inside the black box, let's say.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. So do you feel there is any ground for compromise between the two research programs?
Well, as I say, I'm always stuck on the compromise in terms of methodology rather than in terms of what we can talk about together. I had spent a few years trying to engage with security specialists. We used to get together at the International Studies Association and try to have dialogue between security specialists, most of whom were realists, and I don't know. It's just a different language. It's not, as I say, so much what we're interested in. I mean, those people are all interested in creating a more peaceful world, but and so are we. But the approach, the knowledge, the methodological approaches are just so far apart that it's very hard. And that was really where we got stuck. They would say to me, "Well, you're not really doing IR." And that was really about the methodology. It wasn't really about the subject matter. And I just was kind of stuck on that. And it's just very hard to say. I think classical realism, the old school classical realism, was easier to engage with before it turned into kind of quantitative rational choice. I think that, is much more difficult to engage with. But, when it was more historical, when Morgenthau was writing, I think there was more possibility for engagement. But it's so hard to say. I don't know. I've spent so many years kind of struggling with it that I've just doing other things towards the end of my active intellect career. I just started doing really
Thank you.
trying to learn about these other knowledge and seeing what they can tell us.
Catching up on that, drawing upon your scholarship, are there any feminist insights that you think could enrich the realist research program, particularly like that could bring like maybe new perspectives? If you could pick like, for example, 2 or 3 tenets from feminism that you think could be adopted by realists and would enrich the realist research program, what would you say to them?
Well, it's hard to say because there's so much in realism now. They're doing so many different things. I don't quite know what you mean by that. I think that they would probably be interested in my different principles of political realism. I think they could relate to that. I don't think that they would think very much of them. I don't know. I'm not quite sure how to answer that question.
I wasn't very clear. I meant drawing upon feminist epistemologies, the way, like, for example, the principles you had juxtaposed to Hans Morgenthau's principles. But bringing it up to the 21st century and after your experience with the feminist school in IR and with everything that is going on in the 21st century in our world, if you think that there would be some tenets from the feminist epistemology that could actually be adopted and could change their mind.
Well, I mean, there's a difference between epistemology or talking about changing knowledge structures. That's rather different from thinking about changing anything in the real world. I'm really stuck on that because there's such incompatibility about methodology that I have just come across this with not just realists, but anybody who works with mainstream methodologies. They just don't see that we're doing. The big put down that I always get is that I'm not doing science. And science has many meanings to it, but there's just, I've been to so many conferences with mainstream scholars, not just realists, who are interested in taking me seriously, but they say, but you're not doing science, you're not doing IR. And I just don't know. I'm kind of given up getting over that. I'm leaving that to other people to worry about now. And it's just, I had a lot of fun getting away from it and looking into history and indigenous knowledge, which really fascinates me. Since I went to Australia, I've gotten very interested in what the indigenous can teach us. So I'm sorry, I'm just not answering your question, but I just don't really know what to do with it.
Thank you. Would you like, since you are talking about indigenous people, would you like to elaborate a little on ecofeminism and how maybe this paradigm is very important today with the destruction that we are experiencing in nature?
Well, I mean, indigenous people, I haven't really looked into what ecofeminists are doing today, but indigenous people basically see us as part of nature. They see nature as a living entity, which is a huge paradigm shift, you know. But again, very different. I had a student who was writing about oil drilling. I think it was in Colombia, that indigenous were suing drilling company. I can't remember which one. I think it was Occidental Oil, who was drilling on their lands, and trying to have this legal argument with them was fascinating. It's like what we're talking about with paradigms and so forth. They were just speaking a different language, and the indigenous kept saying, "You're hurting our mother," because they see the earth as alive. So you're injuring our mother. And of course, you know, in Western court system, it doesn't go very far, but it was fascinating just reading the two ways that two different peoples were talking about something like that. But what I do think the indigenous have is how we should have been stewards of nature rather than kind of wrecking nature. And, you know, since the Industrial Revolution, we've done such terrible things in the natural world. Drilling, mining, common fossil fuels. I mean, you know, we should have seen that all these things are just ruining the world. They don't think that way. At least I looked at someone into indigenous in the US and in Australia. They just have a totally different mindset about the way they treat nature. It's fascinating.
And drawing upon this paradigm, do you feel that a more holistic paradigm could spring in IR theory?
No.
Because I feel that maybe this is what is missing, holism. You feel this is not possible?
No, I think that's a problem with IR. It's, you know, I got that piece into the International Feminist Journal of Politics, and that is more open. You see, we have various journals about with very different points of view, and the International Feminist Journal of Politics would publish something like that, but mainstream IR journal would not publish something like that. So the other problem is that when you come up with some new and different knowledge, there's all these barriers to where it gets published. And that is very constraining too in terms of enlarging the discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, around the places that they publish in.
Yeah. Of course, one of the main problems is that mainstream IR is so reductionist, and all these alternative paradigms like holism, you know, so there is a conflict right there, right from the bat. And
Yeah.
yes, please.
Whose knowledge gets listened to, which is what I did in my talk. That's a very important issue. Some people's knowledge we just regard as more important than others we don't listen to. And women generally have suffered from that as a minorities. All kinds of minorities. See someone with a hand up.
There is a hand.
Mimi Hero.
Miss Hero, yeah. I apologize, I didn't see it. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you for the lecture. I'm a student in my bachelor's degree right now, and I'm studying in University of Gothenburg in Sweden, but right now I'm doing a term in Francisco de Vitoria in Madrid. And I'm just very interested in the area. And I'm just wondering and taking the opportunity to ask, like, what do you think is the future's most important focus within feminism and gender inequality that like a student like me could focus on to embrace the most important things to move forward in the
What do you want to do, policy work or academic work? I mean, where do you see your career is going?
like right now I'm very still in the weighing every opportunity, so I'm very open to a lot of things, but I guess my dream would be to work in some international organization with development questions.
Yes, well, that certainly is a possibility. Of course, Sweden, up until the latest government, has a very enlightened development program. I've spent quite a bit of time in Sweden, and I've very much enjoyed it. But I think that if you're going to work in development, what we need is for people to bring in a feminist perspective, to try to get that in the forefront. Because what I have found that certainly I've talked to women who've gone into the State Department here, which is different, and they say that they were never really trained in feminist theory at all, and they would like to bring a feminist perspective to the organization. Often the organizations are quite open to it, but we need more people who know more about it. It kind of shocks me that it's still not taught. I don't know in Sweden whether it's taught very much, but certainly in the US it's not. And I'm always pushing for more courses in women's studies and feminist theory, and it's just always a struggle. Everything's a struggle. And I still, after all these years, cannot understand why learning about women who are half the world's population should be such a struggle, but it is. But if you do something like that and try to keep that in mind and try to figure out some way you can work in an organization where you can work on women's development. So much interesting stuff going on now with respect to women's development. I must say the development agencies have really, I think, taken that over. And if you go on the websites of some of these governments that have declared feminist foreign policy, they have a lot of stuff about development and aid and stuff, putting a gender perspective into a development work.
Quick question, Mimi, do you study in Göteborg?
Yes.
Maria Stern is one of your professors?
Can you repeat the name?
Maria Stern,
No.
because she is professor in Göteborg at the university, and she wrote this book I did put on the chat on European perspectives on feminism.
What is it, Maria Stern?
Yeah,
Maria Stern, yeah, Maria Stern.
very good. Yes, I know.
No, I haven't heard that name, unfortunately.
Okay, she's professor in peace and development studies at the School of Global Studies in Göteborg, Sweden.
Yeah, I'm studying global studies right now. And
What
development
university?
studies.
What university are you at, did you say?
Göteborg, Sweden.
No, I know what you said. Is that where she is?
Ah, okay.
University of Gothenburg. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
The-
it is not that important because you can have a look on the edited volume I put in the chat.
Thank you.
This is from Ann Towns and Maria Stern on European perspectives on feminism. If you are interested in the issue, just an idea. Sorry for interrupting.
No,
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 thank you.
that's a good suggestion. They're both very good. There are a number of good scholars. Swati Parashar is also at Göteborg. Have you heard of Swati Parashar? She's an Indian scholar who does very interesting work on feminism. She went there too, so now they have a real cluster of people at that particular university doing feminist work. She was in Australia at Monash University when I was there, and then she moved to Sweden. And somebody else. So that's three people we have at your university.
I would like, I'm sorry, I didn't have the full picture. If there is no other question, I would like to ask one last question, Professor Tickner. You began your lecture by mentioning pragmatism and the connection to feminism. Obviously, there is feminism, we can say that is based on the philosophical paradigm of pragmatism.
Not altogether, but there are similarities.
Yes. So since you mentioned, because immediately I thought that usually pragmatism, has an anti-theoretical bias. And that's what maybe I didn't understand correctly. And it is often criticized for its skepticism toward grand theoretical frameworks or abstract principles. And thinking that how complex our world has become today, especially with conflict and wars and turbulence, regional turbulence everywhere, how could this be reconciled in order to still inform the research program of feminism? Do you feel that there's no basis anymore? Because there is a limit in pragmatism to engage with complex philosophical questions and to provide comprehensive explanations to phenomena. Do you have an insight about that?
Well, I think that pragmatism is kind of put down because it's not what we might call, what scientists call real theory, because it's kind of learning from events on the ground. So it isn't a sort of theory that stands above everything. It's a theory that is constantly evolving, constantly learning. And I think that's what feminists like about that approach. When you go into a research summary, often you go in, if you're sort of using mainstream theoretical approaches, you go in with an idea, you have a theory, and then you're going to work on the data to confirm your theory. But pragmatists and feminists tend to go into asking questions about things without a strongly formulated theoretical framework to start with. So it's very different. And, you certainly can learn a lot from pragmatism or just engaging in, feminists will often say that they go into a research subject with one question and they're going to find the answer, and then the answer turns out to be something totally different. That's very unsettling to pure theorists. But it's knowledge, and it's knowledge you're learning as you're going along. So I don't know how it would apply. It would apply to everything you're studying, I think. But some people don't see it as theory at all.
Thank you very much. With that, I think we came to the end of the event. If there is no, okay, there is a question in the audience. Hi there, it's from Roberto San Diego. Are there any recommendations for scholars or journals relating feminism to space policy and international space law? Furthermore, are there any recommendations relating to a feminist critique of the Gulf War? Thank you.
None that I know of. I'm sorry. I just can't answer that question. Space. I don't know. It'd be interesting. That's something you could write.
Yes, this is something to be explored. It will be very interesting to see. I had a small chat with Professor Tickner via emails, and these are questions that, bother us. It will be very interesting to see what will be the connection of the feminist research program with the rise of artificial intelligence, which will be very important, especially in security and peace studies in the future. There will be so many issues that will be created. So this opens the window for a whole new research.
Too much exciting research going on now.
Yeah.
So wonderful.
Okay. If there's no other comment, I'm just checking right now to make sure. Okay. So Professor Tickner, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. It was such an honor to host you and, to discuss with you, be here with you. We're extremely honored and grateful for your time. I also thank the audience, the professors, the students, the scholars who were here with us today. We came to the end of the event. Let me please inform you that on May 11, we have a virtual roundtable. Maybe Professor Reichman, would you like to say a little more about that?
No, I just want to ask you to say something on it because you're the organizer.
Okay, I'm not only the organizer, we're organizing with the Department of Political Science of your university as well, which I'm not trying to pronounce. If you would like to say it, because I will kill the name, Justus Liebig.
Justus Liebig University, Gießen.
Yeah, great. And also with Intbolsek in Turkey. We're organizing a very exciting virtual roundtable on Give Realism a Chance, realist perspectives in a century of complexity and turbulence, with a lineup of very important distinguished professors. So please check on that. And also June 4th, I'm hosting Professor Christopher Hill, University of Cambridge. We're going to discuss about European foreign policy, considering that on June 8th, there are going to be the European elections, and also about the British foreign policy after Brexit and what's going on with Britain today. So please also stay tuned for this. So everybody, thank you so much. Professor Tickner, it was such an honor. Thank you very much. I hope we have the opportunity to engage again in the future. We're certainly going to keep in touch. And in case any of the students would like to get in contact with you and ask you questions, it will be okay with you, right?
Okay.
Okay.
Do you have my email somewhere? Do you have my email somewhere?
Yes, of course, and I will provide it in case somebody wants to engage one-on-one with you. I will certainly provide it. Maybe you can also write it in the chat if you like.
If I can find it. I'm very, very old-fashioned on all these things. I'm just looking for what my chat is. I don't see where it is. Oh, here it is. Okay.
Effie, may I ask, when is the Christopher Hill event?
June 4.
Great.
June 4 at, I think, at 6 o'clock my time. But I will send formal invitations and via social media.
Yes, and you can also send an invitation for the realism event, maybe here in the chat.
We have the emails of all people who are registered, and that's what we were planning to do with Ms. Milioti, and we're going to send out the invitation to everybody who has registered today. So we're waiting for Professor Tickner. She's writing her email in the chat.
Not seeing it coming up.
That's okay. It's not a problem. I will provide it if anybody would like, because I know that some students would like to speak with Professor Tickner. Please come in contact with me or with Ms. Milioti, and we will send you her email address.
Dr.
Yes, please.
May I interrupt? Sorry. Dr. Haralambaki, do you by any chance have any mail list where you can, which you use to inform people about events of those?
We are creating right now, as we speak with Ms. Milioti, we're creating a mailing list that will be in English, because thus far we had only the mailing list by the Institute that is in Greek. And obviously right now with these lectures, we have an international audience. And we are going to use the email list to send out notifications about all these web events that my program is organizing, but also about future conferences and workshops, especially if they're going to be in the English language, that my program or the Institute is going to organize. So obviously you are registered, we have your email, and we're going to send you.
Thanks, can you add me? Yes. Thanks.
I put it in the chat. I can see it now.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, we have Professor Tickner's email in the chat. Please write it down, those of you who are interested, and you are very welcome to communicate personally with her. Professor Tickner, thank you so much. Such a pleasure to talk with you. I hope we have the opportunity to discuss again in the future. And we remain at your disposal for. I will also send you the recording of this lecture.
Okay, well, I really enjoyed it, and it's up to all you people to carry on. Okay.
Okay. Well, everybody, have a good night. Happy Easter to those of you who are celebrating this week. And we will be in touch via my research program. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Have a good day or have a good night. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Oh, God, it was exhausting.